Avelino, thank you very much for these very kind words. It means a lot to me. So I would like to thank the organizers, especially Professor Kan Lee, for inviting me to this very prestigious conference. The last days have been a fantastic conference for me, so I'm really pleased to be here. It's extremely well organized. Whenever I came to China, it's so impressive how fast the development goes, but even more impressive is the science which takes place here in China. And so I was very much impressed the last days what I've seen here. So thank you very much to all the organizers. They did an excellent job. So in my talk, I would like to talk a little bit about the bridging of homogeneous and heterogeneous catalysis. And probably you can learn more from a book of our main organizer of the conference, because he has written a book on that topic, as most of you probably know. So I will give you a little bit a different perspective, more from the organic side, and you will decide. I know most of you are probably from heterogeneous catalysis, but you might decide afterwards that there is also interesting homogeneous catalysis which might inspire also heterogeneous catalysis. So what I would like to talk to you first is, I would like to tell you how metal and ligands, that's a little bit like in heterogeneous catalysis, the nanoparticles and the support, how they work together in concert. And then I would like to continue from a personal experience on the development of new catalysts. After that, I would like to briefly put my view on homogeneous and heterogeneous catalysis, the differences and the similarities. And finally, I would like to talk a little bit about the future. What can we learn from each other? I would like to start with one example from work from our group, or part of our group, which is related to energy. So apart from industrial processes, synthetic methodology, we are also interested in developing catalysts for energy. And this is what you have seen also at this conference in several beautiful lectures. This is the general concept using chemistry or catalysis for energy technologies. We take renewable energy, we convert renewable energy into storable energy because electrons are difficult to store. And from the chemical compounds, we can use them for chemistry, or we might release the energy stored in these compounds again. And so we are interested in all actually of these steps. But I would like to start with one specific example. And the one example I would like to start with has to do with methanol reforming. Also in this conference, there was a nice talk from Zabik about steam reforming. So when we started in this area, there was basically no homogeneous catalyst known for this type of alcohol reforming, especially for methanol. Other alcohols are more easy, and you will understand in a few minutes why they are more easy. So if we talk about steam reforming methanol, then we convert methanol, as you know, in the presence of water to hydrogen and carbon dioxide. And there's lots of heterogeneous catalysts known, but the best system when we started our work was this platinum nanoparticles developed by James Dumessage and his group at the beginning of 2000. Typically, for a heterogeneous catalyst system, from the viewpoint of a homogeneous person, the conditions are relatively drastic. So if you're involved in heterogeneous dehydrogenation, you might not think this is drastic, but from the perspective of homogeneous catalysis, this is somewhat drastic conditions, 200 to 230 degrees, 25 to 50 bars. And also because of these drastic conditions, a significant amount of carbon monoxide is produced of that. Because the intermediate in this chemistry, formic acid, as you know, can not only decompose to hydrogen and carbon dioxide, but it also can decompose to water and CO. And this reaction is favored at higher temperature. And whenever you have a high temperature process, you unavoidably form also some CO. Why CO is important? CO is important because if you want to use this hydrogen in fuel cells, the fuel cells tolerate only a minor amount of CO. And so the general goal for such hydrogen production catalysts are producing less, I would say, than 10 ppm of CO in order to allow for a long-term stability of the corresponding fuel cell. And that was actually our goal initially, or one of the goals and challenges why we looked into homogeneous dehydrogenation of methanol. There is a lot of homogeneous catalysts known for dehydrogenation of other alcohols. There's a lot of homogeneous so-called transfer hydrogenation catalysts, but methanol is especially difficult because the dehydrogenation is thermodynamically more difficult compared to other alcohols. And the system I will show you in a minute basically works at 80 degrees. It's relatively stable, so it produces per active center of catalyst more than 500,000 molecules of hydrogen, and it's also stable for weeks. And it produces less than 1 ppm of carbon monoxide. Why I choose this example at the beginning of my talk? Because, as I said, ligands and metal work in concert here together. I will tell you later more about the chemistry. At the moment, I only want to highlight that we have a stable ruthenium catalyst complex here, a molecular defined species. And this molecular defined species undergoes all the different dehydrogenation steps, methanol to form aldehyde, or the corresponding water adduct of formaldehyde, dehydrogenation to formic acid, and dehydrogenation of formic acid then to carbon dioxide or carbonate and hydrogen. They all take place at the same catalyst. Interestingly, for this catalyst, the rate determining step is the dehydrogenation of the formic acid, which is one of the most easy or more easy dehydrogenation catalysts, but for this one, I will also explain later why. This is the rate determining step in this chemistry, and you can run this cycle at around 70 to 90 degrees for weeks or for several 100,000 times. So it's a very stable and active system. The key point is, if you look carefully at all these formula, is that the dehydrogenation always takes place at the metal center and the coordinated ligand. This is what we call now in homogeneous catalysis non-innocent ligands. The classical rhodium phosphine-Wilkinson complex, which enabled the first hydroformylation chemistry, which enabled the first hydrogenation, homogeneous catalytic hydrogenation chemistry, there the ligand directs the activity on the metal center. It does not really participate. It controls sterically and electronically the metal center, but it does not actively participate. Here, this is different. The ligand actively participates in the catalysis. And that's, I believe, similar to a lot of heterogeneous catalysis reactions. Today, we call this type of catalysis cooperative catalysis. You have also probably heard the talk of Professor Kuiling Ding from the Shanghai Institute of Organic Chemistry, who talked about asymmetric cooperative catalysis. And cooperative catalysis, I believe, offers a lot of possibility, and it's involved in much more processes than we normally believe. So cooperative catalysis is the positive, actually, modulation as a result of the mutual interaction between the individual constituents of a catalytic system. It can be the support, it can be some co-catalyst. In a homogeneous case, it can be the ligand and the metal center and so on. So there's various possibilities. And this synergistic working together controls the overall behavior, and it gives you an additional dimension of control in the area of catalysis. And interestingly, by working together, the system displays actually improved properties. So like you see actually here in this picture, none of the ends would be able to use this stick, but all together working in concert, they are able to do something. And it's, I think, the same when humans work together, but also when the individual constituents of catalytic systems work together. I've shown you the chemistry for the methanol dehydrogenation with ruthenium. In fact, if you have such a cooperative catalyst system, the metal is not so important. And this is contrary to our traditional belief. And you will see this throughout my talk in several examples. Normally, we believe the metal is important. If we have palladium nanoparticles, it has to be palladium, or at least it has to be noble metals. You cannot achieve something with palladium, with iron, which normally can be done with palladium. I will show you in my talk that the metal is not so important. I'm convinced nowadays that if we have the right, let me call it microenvironment, either homogeneous or heterogeneous, the metal is not so important, and you can achieve with manganese or iron things which normally are only achievable with noble metals. And so this complex resembles the ruthenium complex. The difference is the central metal. Again, the central metal is strongly stabilized by a sort of pin set, so we call these ligands also pincer ligands. Our group was the first one. It was Elisabetta Alberico, a visiting scientist from Italy, who synthesized this first aliphatic pincer complex. And in this specific geometry, the iron behaves similar like the ruthenium. And the reaction conditions, for example, for the methanol dehydrogenation, are more or less the same. The productivity is a little bit lower, so it's not several 100,000, it can be several 10,000 because the system is more labile, but the general reactivity is the same. So there is no difference in this system between the noble metal and the non-noble metal system. So this type of catalyst, I've showed you examples about dehydrogenation. And as you all know, catalysis is a dynamic principle and it's reversible. And because of the micro-reversibility, depending on the conditions, you can do hydrogenations or you can do dehydrogenations. And this you will also see throughout my talk in several examples. So when we don't use hydrogen, but take away the hydrogen, either by releasing it or by using a hydrogen scavenger, then we can do the dehydrogenation reaction. If we put hydrogen pressure onto a system, we can do hydrogenation with the same type of catalyst. And so this iron complex is the same catalyst which does the methanol dehydrogenation, but it also is a hydrogenation catalyst. And normally, if you think about hydrogenation, for example, of nitriles, then you think about noble metal hydrogenation catalysts, especially if you think about homogeneous catalysis, but here it works with an iron system. Of course, it also works with the ruthenium, but more astonishingly with the iron. And again, metal and ligand are acting together in concert. So it's simplified, shown here. This is the stable pre-catalyst. We generate this dihydride complex. Normally, so we have two hydrides here on the metal center, and normally, classically, these two hydrides are delivered to the substrate. But in this case, it's not the two hydrides on the metal which do the reduction, but it's the hydride on the metal and the proton on the nitrogen. And so we deliver these two protons to the nitrile, making an imine, generating this active species. You will see this again also later on. We regenerate the catalyst. The most remarkable thing is this regeneration takes place at room temperature. So this ion center, similar to the ion hydrogenases in biological systems, can activate hydrogen at room temperature. We generate the active system again, and then we reduce the imine to the amine. We can do this with diamines. We have done this with aromatic nitriles. We have done it with a lot of examples. If you're more interested in this chemistry, I refer to this publication. As I said, the most interesting thing is the activation of the hydrogen, because, as you know, iron is not a typical metal for activation of hydrogen. Of course it is, you will say, in heterogeneous catalysis. There's a Haber-Bosch process and all these things. There's Fischer-Tropsch chemistry. It's clearly a hydrogenation catalyst. You're right. But the temperature is much above 200 degrees. Here we have an ion center which activates hydrogen at room temperature. Probably even below, we didn't try. So if you work at 1 bar of hydrogen in a solvent, in an NMR tube, you can see this equilibrium by NMR. So it easily, because it's more or less thermoneutral, it easily goes on and off. And if you put a little bit of hydrogen pressure onto the system, it goes here. And if you release the pressure, it goes here. So it's a very active ion center for activation of hydrogen. And if you look at the overall chemistry, you will realize, and that's also different to most homogeneous catalysis, it's not that the ligand goes on and off, which often takes place in hydroformylation chemistry and other organometallic. The ligand stays on the system. So we call this outer sphere mechanism. It's not an inner sphere where the hydrogen coordinates first to the metal, then activates. It's really an outer sphere activation. And the interesting thing why it works so easily is because it's a heterolytic cleavage of the hydrogen, and the proton goes to the nitrogen, to the basic nitrogen, and the hydride goes to the ion center. So you can do simple reactions with that, but you can do also very complicated organic reactions. Catalysts can be used for various transformations. Most often we don't do it because our expertise is in a certain area. If we are interested or if we are experienced in carbon dioxide hydrogenation, we do carbon dioxide hydrogenation. But carbon dioxide hydrogenation is very much related to ester hydrogenation. And I believe all of you who develop catalysts for carbon dioxide hydrogenation, you have also active catalysts in hand for ester hydrogenation. Probably most of the time you don't do it or don't test it because it's a different area, but you can do it. This is a cooperation project with Novartis. It's a clinical phase 2 candidate, and this was the first organometallic complex which could do this reaction. And they were really surprised at Novartis when this worked. And the yield was much better compared to the stoichiometric reaction they did before with sodium borohydride. I should also point out at this point, of course, we are not the only group doing this type of pincer catalysis or activation. There's various excellent groups working in there. There is, of course, also eminent, actually, precedent in the literature, Bernhard Shaw, Gerard van Coten, Jensen in the US. They all actually did fantastic work in the 80s using these complexes first. And then it was mainly David Milstein who made these compounds popular in organometallic chemistry, and since the last 10 years, a variety or a huge amount actually of groups worldwide work on this type of catalysis. I should say this also. I would like to show you now some examples where we make use of this chemistry. And this is some very recent work. In fact, this came onto the web on Monday this week, so it's very recent work. And it's work which we did together with Yui Li, an excellent former postdoc who's now at the Lanzhou Institute of Chemical Physics, but on the Suzhou side, so the Chinese know probably very well about this. And he developed very independently this type of chemistry for bringing together two carbon monoxide molecules to make ethylene glycol. We have seen in this conference yesterday, there was the Fischer-Tropsch section, but also early on, we have very beautiful talks about the valorization of carbon monoxide, Fischer-Tropsch chemistry. But if you're doing Fischer-Tropsch chemistry, you know very well the reductive coupling of carbon monoxide is not easy. It's difficult. And most of the time, we reduce everything throughout the system if we are able to go over this kinetic barrier, and then we basically make alkanes, probably some higher chain alcohols also, it's possible, but it's always, or very often, it's Schulz-Flory type distribution, so it's not selective. Ethylene glycol, I believe more than 50% of the ethylene glycol are not manufactured in China, but are used in China. It's used mainly polyethylene terephthalate, for example. There's also various other uses. And there is, I would say, a significant interest in new processes for making ethylene glycol. 40% of the worldwide production nowadays, to my knowledge, are made by the Shell Omega process. The Shell omega process is a highly selective process, much more selective than the traditional hydrolysis of ethylene oxide. So what happens here is ethylene oxide is reacted with carbon dioxide to ethylene carbonate, and then this is hydrolyzed very selectively. This is the advantage of this process to make ethylene glycol. There is a minor application using the so-called Ube chemistry. Ube in Japan developed a process for the oxidation actually of CO using alkyl nitrides on small scale. But to my knowledge, industry realized, and this has also been combined with heterogeneous hydrogenation of the corresponding ephyllite. We were interested, or we are still interested, in selectively coupling carbon monoxide at low temperature under mild conditions. And our original idea was in this chemistry, we combine, because it's much more easy, we combine two molecules of CO to the oxamide or to oxalic acid derivatives and then reduce them to the corresponding ethylene glycol. How this process looks more in detail is shown here. So CO is reacted again under relatively mild conditions in the presence of a palladium catalyst, low loading. These are optimized conditions in excellent yield, giving you the oxamide. This chemistry takes place in the presence of air, so it's a benign oxidant, we believe much more benign than alkyl nitrides, and it can take place under very mild conditions, although the activity has to be still improved. This also to make clear. The oxamide now, that is the interesting point, can be reduced with the catalysts I've shown you before, either the ruthenium one or the iron one, to give you the ethylene glycol and the amine. And the amine then is recycled back in the process, so the overall reaction is 2CO with oxygen and then hydrogen, giving you ethylene glycol. And the amine is recycled to a significant amount. Here you see the individual steps. If you're more interested in the details, I'll be happy also to talk to you afterwards. I just want to highlight two things in these two steps. So on the one hand, we can get relatively high productivity. That's for us also was quite astonishingly that we can stabilize the palladium catalyst system with sterically hindered phosphines. And the phosphine is not oxidized under these conditions. And the second thing is we can do the hydrogenolysis of this amide in the presence of ruthenium catalysts or iron catalysts. And this iron catalyst is another type of iron catalyst which undergoes or which allows for cooperative catalysis. So here, these complexes I have explained already to you, they're the ligand, the pincer, and the metal, they act together. Also in this type of complexes, it's the same. They look totally different, but the principle is the same. And I will give you only one example there as an intermediate, which is shown here. We use this type of complex. It has been first synthesized by Hans-Jörg Knölker, a German chemist, an organometallic one, never applied in catalysis. It's a very labile system with the hydride here, but you can also use the tricarbonyl, then it's very stable, stable on air, and you can use it fairly easy. And with this complex, you can do hydrogenation of ketones, you can do hydrogenation of imines, of various functional groups. Interestingly, you can also do stereoselective hydrogenations. This complex is not chiral. So you might say, how is it possible? It's possible by adding a co-catalyst, a chiral acid, and this chiral acid acts together with this complex, again in concerto, allowing for relatively high selectivity. So at this point, I would like to shift gears a little bit and now move from homogeneous to heterogeneous. And you will see the same principles we believe are applied. So I always tell my students, and therefore I like this picture, some of you might have seen it before. So if you're experienced in a certain area, of course you have to be experienced. That's important. You have to have some know-how. But if you're experienced in a certain area, then you should not stay in that area, at least not all the time. What you should do is you should move to some other areas, because in these other areas there's beautiful things to discover. And most of the time, if we stay, we know this thing, but something new is really to be discovered in another area. And so I'm always in favor of trying something new, although it's at first sight completely different. So how to develop catalysts? So if we want to move in new areas, so what can we do? So if I think about coupling chemistry, for example, just to name one area, you can also look at hydrogenation catalysis, or you might think about oxidation catalysis, whatever area you think of. There is, I would say, very established catalysts. So over the time, several innovation cycles have been made with these systems. And if you're working on these systems, you have to know, of course, that you are standing on the shoulders of capable scientists. Because the people who have done the development of these catalysts before, they were really clever people. It's not that you are the only one who can do that. So I always try to encourage people actually not so much working in that area, but to look for something new. Clearly, the outcome or the possibility, of course, the performance of the catalyst will be not as good as here, but it will allow for first actually innovations. And then from there on, it will continue. And so if we think about a lot of areas, we have the noble metals very well established in homogeneous catalysis, at least in hydrogenation. In recent years, iron, copper, nickel is for a long time, of course, established. So what can be something new here? And this was a question we asked ourselves, and we started to look, I would say, for unusual hydrogenation catalysts. If I ask you now, what is an unusual hydrogenation catalyst? So there's individual thinkings and answers probably to that, but for me, an unusual hydrogenation catalyst is a system or a metal which is not known in hydrogenation catalysis. So iron is, of course, known in hydrogenation catalysis, not only since the last year, it's already a long time. Copper is known, a lot of things. So which metal is not known? One of the few metals which are, to my knowledge, are absolutely unknown in hydrogenation catalysis is manganese. So manganese, it's a very available metal. It's the third largest metal occurring in the Earth crust. Apart from iron, it's the only one where the American FDA allows for more than 10 or 20 ppm to be staying in your products, in your products. And so the manganese, sorry, it's really, I would say, a very attractive metal, but it was absolutely not known in hydrogenation catalysis. And so what we did, in fact, what Saravana Kumar Elangovan did, and you will see a picture on the next slide, he made these pincer complexes, which I've shown you before, with the manganese. And we looked if this type of complex can also activate hydrogen, which is the crucial step for hydrogenation chemistry. The complexes can be relatively easy made. So this is a stable air and water-soluble manganese complex. You can add a hydride, and then you get the similar compound like with the iron. It's orange-red, sensitive, but it's possible. You can also in situ generate the system, and you will see this is more important for practical catalysis. But what we clearly can see is the formation of the hydride, and we can also nicely follow the chemistry by looking by IR spectroscopy at the carbonyl bands. And this catalyst, in fact, is a wonderful catalyst for hydrogenation of all types of polar bonds. So we can hydrogenate ketones, alpha-beta unsaturated ketones. We can reduce nitriles. We can reduce aldehydes. So any type of functional group we can reduce with manganese. And this is, to my knowledge, the first example of manganese-based catalyst for hydrogenation. Manganese is normally associated with oxidation chemistry. And as you see, it has also some quite nice scope. The crucial thing, again, for the activation of the hydrogen is the subtle interaction of the metal center and the nitrogen. And by the participation of the nitrogen atom, with the manganese atom, if you look at the molecular orbitals, so at the initial activation state, the fundamental elementary step for the activation of hydrogen, you will see that both the nitrogen atom and the manganese atom actually favor the heterolytic scission dissociation of the hydrogen, generating the amido hydrogen and the metal hydride, which is the key point for the following up hydrogenation chemistry. And you can use this catalyst again because of the microreversibility of catalysis. You can use this not only for hydrogenation, you can do dehydrogenation. I will not talk today about methanol dehydrogen because this catalyst also does methanol dehydrogenation. And we are in the process of writing up these results, but you can use this dehydrogenation hydrogenation chemistry also for some interesting, I would say, bond forming processes. And one of the interesting bond forming processes, and discussed this at breakfast with Dmitry Mozin, is of course the so-called hydrogen borrowing chemistry or the hydrogen autotransfer chemistry. And the hydrogen autotransfer chemistry is in principle shown here. So you use an alcohol, like in the classical Gerbet chemistry, you do a dehydrogenation, then you react this with an amine or with a CH acidic compound, and finally you hydrogenate the double bond again. So what you do, and why this chemistry is called hydrogen borrowing chemistry, you borrow your hydrogen at the first step and you add it at the end. So this is chemistry which takes place without additional hydrogen. It takes place without pressure. So you do a dehydrogenation, hydrogenation without any pressure in the system. And you get, without activating group, you convert an alcohol into CC bond, Gerbet reaction, or into amines, one of the classical examples of hydrogen autotransfer chemistry. So what you do here is you use an alcohol, use an amine, and you make an alkylation in a green way, I would say, because the only side product is water in this chemistry. This is the formation of the pre-catalyst. This is stable for weeks on the shelf, so it doesn't need any specific precautions. And then you can basically use this one and do all kinds of alkylations. Because of in the interest of time, I show you only methylations. There's very nice work from Ben Feringa and Katalin Barta, who used iron catalysts for alcohol amination. Beautiful work. And it worked with a lot of alcohol, but not with methanol. Because again, methanol, like in the dehydrogenation, is the most difficult one. But here, manganese worked beautifully. And we get all kinds. This is the first example actually with a non-noble metal doing, I would say, green methylation reactions. So you use methanol in the system, 100 degrees, and in the presence of double bonds, heterocycles, easily activatable groups, you can get very selective monoalkylation in this process. So let me give you some more now examples from the last years. So how we moved from there on actually then to heterogeneous catalysts, which I believe use the same principle. And the story, this part actually starts again with energy, because we were interested in developing actually catalysts which can use hydrogen under the conditions of water electrolysis, and then use this hydrogen with the waste stream of power plants, for example, and to produce energy carriers. And the easiest reaction is the first reduction step to the formic acid. And the formic acid then can be released, can be decomposed again to release the CO2 amines. So CO2 is a hydrogen carrier in this principle, and the hydrogen is released here. And we were the first, together with Gabor Laurenci, who published this general concept. Of course, the individual steps have been intensively described in the literature before, especially in homogeneous catalysis. The work of Walter Leitner and his group is beautiful, but also Noyori and Jessup, for example. And we looked initially at the decomposition, but in the end, we also built an overall system. But this is not, I don't have enough time to show you all the details of this. During the course, actually, of this development, we found also an iron catalyst, which was active for this chemistry. And this was the first iron catalyst which allows for dehydrogenation of formic acid in a similar, I would say, efficiency way, in a similar way, with similar performance like the noble metal catalyst systems. It's this very stabilized ion center with a very special phosphine ligand. I will not go into the details. It's a tetraphosphine, stabilizes the system. It was published only once before our work by Claudio Bianchini and Maurizio Perozzini in Italy. They did it at the early 90s, and then this complex was totally forgotten. And we looked for various ion catalysts for this type of dehydrogenation, hydrogenation chemistry, and for more than 1.5 years, and we were really desperate and close to giving up until we found this system. And this system is active close to the noble metal systems. Recently, we also looked very carefully into the mechanism. Again, I will not go into too much detail here. I just want to mention that the rate determining step is the dehydrogenation, the beta hydride elimination on this ion center here from the ion formate. One can easily observe this species by various analytical techniques here. And there is 2 dehydrogenation cycles. Again, if you're interested, come to me afterwards and I'll be happy to explain more details. But what we understood from this chemistry, and this is now the important point, is that iron is able actually to activate formic acid, but on the same way it is able to reduce carbon dioxide to the formate. And if you understand this principle, then you are able also to reduce or dehydrogenate other compounds. Compounds related to formic acid or reduce compounds related to carbon dioxide. And so we looked for the chemical reactivity of these species, and we found that this is an active hydrogenation catalyst, again, for various functional groups or compounds. And one of the compounds we were interested in was the reduction of nitro compounds, because this is also, especially for the fine chemical industry, an important process. And we were quite happy having a very active ion-based system for the reduction of various nitro compounds. We have done more than 30 compounds, and again, if you're interested in the substrate scope and all these things, I advise you to the literature. When we had this result, we were really proud, and we thought this is something interesting for industry. And we went to Lanxess, the former chemical part of Bayer, and we said they do nitro reduction, and said, okay, we have an ion catalyst. Okay, we know nitrobenzene is done with ranitidine, but all of the more specialized nitroarenes, they are used with precious metal catalysts. And now we have an ion system. And what they told us, we are not interested. All of our processes run with heterogeneous catalysts in nitro reduction. So if you have an active heterogeneous ion catalyst, then we can continue to talk. And that was the starting point for looking for ion catalyst, heterogeneous ion catalyst for nitro reduction. And it was Jagadesh Rahenayali, a very talented, I would say also very inspired postdoc from India, who tried initially to immobilize this system and other ion-based complexes to found activity. So what we did is we combined metal precursors with ligands, or we made the complex, nothing special. We put inorganic or carbon as a support into the solution. We immobilized the system, we removed the solvent, and all of the immobilized systems were non-active. And then it was, I would say, coincidence or luck that Jagadesh worked in the same laboratory like Annette Enrica Surkus, an electrochemist, who was trying at that time the development or working on the development of ion-based fuel cells. And she was very much inspired by the work of Daudelet in Canada, and she pyrolyzed typically her systems. And because of her work, because all of his systems were not active, he also at one point pyrolyzed the system. And then, to our surprise, these systems were active. So this is the unusual point, making organometallic complexes then on the surface and pyrolyzing them, because of course your complex will not be stable. But the interesting thing, the compounds were active. This brings me to the point, before I show you the results, what are the differences between homogeneous and heterogeneous catalysis? And most of you will now think about homogeneous catalysis, that's sugar in water. Heterogeneous catalysis, Chinese tea in water. So this is the way we think about catalysis. At least I think most of the organic people. But in my opinion, this is not really the difference between homogeneous and heterogeneous. In fact, I think there is, as you will see later on, there is no difference. So the differences are not if the system is homogeneous or heterogeneous, the differences are often the conditions. And I realized this when I was earlier on at one of the conferences where people from homogeneous and heterogeneous catalysis were together, and I believe you can learn a lot at these conferences. Because I was driving with a student to the conference side, and I asked him, what are you doing? And the student said, I'm doing low temperature CH activation. And so for me, as an organic, organometallic type person, low temperature CH activation is room temperature CH activation, minus 70 degree probably CH activation. And so I asked him, what do you mean by low temperature? And he said, 400 degrees. So for the organometallic community, or the homogeneous typically, low temperature CH activation is room temperature. For people doing methane activation, low temperature CH activation is 400 degrees. That's the real difference between homogeneous and heterogeneous catalysis. And this is a classical heterogeneous catalysis process, one of the most important we know, ammonia, and this I would say is a real process. 300 bar, 450 degrees. Ion catalyst. Of course, you would like to do this at lower temperature, and this is a highly optimized system, but it's not possible. The system doesn't allow for the activation or for the hydrogenation under lower temperatures. If you think about the biocatalytic way, of course, it's a totally different way. It's different. It takes place under much lower, much milder conditions, although, of course, with much less, I would say, productivity. So if you think about this as an ion-catalyzed hydrogenation process, then we were really surprised that the ion catalysts, which we got out of this procedure from Jagadesh here, they allowed for hydrogen activation at 80 to 90 degrees. The first systems, we did the catalysis at 120 degrees, and you can reduce all kinds of nitroarenes very selectively in the presence of this ion system. And that was the first actually selective ion catalyst for nitro reductions. And Avellino has beautiful work. He knows very well some of these substrates with the gold catalysts, for example. And of course, we also were quite inspired by his work. But this system is very tolerant to various, I would say, functional groups. You can reduce the nitro in the presence of nitrile, triple bonds, ketones, and so it's really selective for the reduction of nitro groups. How does it work? So these are some control experiments we typically do. So if you use commercial cobalt on carbon, then you know cobalt on carbon is a hydrogenation catalyst, but not a particularly good one. So there is some hydrogenation under these conditions, conversion 9%, but it works. Our catalyst doesn't work at all for these olefins. So it's a much less hydrogenation catalyst for non-polar bonds than this one. However, for the nitro, it works perfectly, while the commercial cobalt on carbon doesn't work. So what is the difference between these two systems? The difference between these systems, and I show you only some particles here, is that all the active catalyst systems which we found of this type, they have iron, cobalt, nickel, you name it, nanoparticles, and these nanoparticles are in contact with carbon-nitrogen phases. And most often we have active systems if we have a few layers of carbon, 3 to 20, and part of these carbon atoms are replaced by nitrogen. And because of this interaction, and you will see how we explain this, we believe this creates especially active catalyst systems. Because most of you are very familiar with heterogeneous catalysis, you can imagine how many possibilities you have. So you can change the ligand, which you want to pyrolyze, you can change the metal, you change the pyrolysis conditions, you change the support, so you have various possibilities. All of the active systems which we found, they have something in common. They have either a coordination of the nitrogen species with the metal nanoparticles, which we can follow by XPS spectroscopy, or they have this graphitic nitrogen into the system. Apart from that, there is sometimes pyrolytic nitrogen, ammonium-type nitrogen also in the system, but especially for the hydrogenations, these type of nitrogen species seems to be the most important. And we believe that the nanoparticles are in close contact with these carbon-nitrogen phases, as you have seen in the TEM pictures. So this is a schematic representation, what we think is the catalyst, of course nothing else than a schematic representation. So we have carbon, for example, you have nanoparticles on the carbon surface, and then in contact with these, in case of cobalt, for example, core shell catalysts, then you have these carbon-nitrogen, we call it flakes, and because of the interaction of the flakes with the nanoparticles, we generate active centers for hydrogen activation. And the principle, and now I'm coming to the first part of my talk, we believe is exactly the same. So I showed you this. This is the ion catalyst. I showed you at room temperature we can put hydrogen on and off. So there is a nitrogen atom in close contact to the ion center. And this allows for the activation of the hydrogen. And we believe the same is true in this thing. The carbon-nitrogen phase, if it's in the right microenvironment, let me call it, to the metal nanoparticles, allow for a heterolytic splitting of the hydrogen. The heterolytic splitting of the hydrogen is much more easy under these conditions, and so we have a much lower activation energy compared to the classical, for example, Haber-Bosch catalyst. And then we can do all kinds of reactions with these. We can do hydrogenation and dehydrogenation. Of course, I always like the term, life is much more complicated than we show on these pictures. And it's of course also here true. It's not only the carbon-nitrogen phase which we generate. It's not only the metal nanoparticle, it's also the support. So it's a multi-dimensional or multi-dimensional room where all the parameters come together. And if you change the support, then you change the reactivity. So the carbon-based catalysts, they are very good for the nitro reduction, extremely selective. But they are not active for other functional groups. That's the reason why they are so selective. If we change the support, for example, if we go to alumina, and this is work of Feng Shen, a student actually here from Peking University, from the group of Ning Zhao. He did the immobilization of cobalt catalysts on alumina, for example, but also magnesium oxide, silica, carbon, boron carbide. And he found, for example, on alpha alumina, we got very active catalysts for ketone and nitrile reduction. And I'll give you some examples here. So this is only an excerpt of, again, more than 40 examples. I show you here only once for this catalyst, the recycling. We always do 5 to 10 times recycling with all the catalysts I've shown you. And typically, after, I would say, the 7th or 8th run, we see some slow deactivation. We need a little bit longer from time, but the catalysts are relatively stable, let me say. And if you look actually into the reaction conditions here, we have the catalyst, we do isopropanol, we work in aqueous ammonia in this system, we add a little bit of aqueous ammonia to the system. You see it's also stable to water and ammonia. We can get very good yields of the corresponding amines in this reaction. And if you look carefully at the reaction conditions and compare these to the reaction conditions of this slide, which I've shown you at the beginning, then you will realize the reaction conditions are very similar. So there is no difference if we use a heterogeneous catalyst or a homogeneous. The active principle in these systems is more or less the same. The activity of the homogeneous system now is not much different from the heterogeneous one if we have the same type of microenvironment, although it's totally structural different. But we believe the microenvironment, the actives, is related. And so, and I'm not sure who knows this song. It's a beautiful song. It's about one mankind, but I believe one can also adapt this to chemistry. And like it said beautifully in this song, there is only one catalysis. So homogeneous and heterogeneous catalysis, there is no difference. It's sisters and brothers. And there is only one type of catalysis. Let me give you some more examples where I show you that the homogeneous and the heterogeneous systems, they work under similar type of conditions if they look similar, or if they work according to the same principles. This is now a dehydrogenation reaction. I showed you so far only hydrogenation reactions. Now I show you dehydrogenation, the microreversibility of catalysis. So we do oxidation of an easily oxidizable alcohol, benzyl alcohol, allylic alcohol, propagylic alcohol, higher aliphatic alcohol in the presence of methanol. Methanol is more difficult to dehydrogenate, so it selectively takes place here. We make the aldehyde. Methanol reacts with the aldehyde, make the hemiacetal. The hemiacetal is activated, undergoes dehydrogenation again, so you do an oxidative cross-esterification. We have done this also for ethanol, making ethyl acetate, which is of interest to industry also. But I show you here some examples. And if you look at the conditions, it's typical homogeneous catalysis conditions. 1 bar of oxygen, 60 to 80 degrees. The group of Lei Ivan in Wuhan, they described palladium catalyst for this type of reaction under quite similar, but it's a noble metal system. But here you use a heterogeneous cobalt system under quite similar type of conditions. You can make nitriles. For those who are familiar with amoxidation, they know if you do this type of chemistry in the presence of aqueous ammonia, the aldehyde reacts with the ammonia to make the imine. The imine then is dehydrogenated again, and you make nitriles. And you make nitriles without using toxic cyanides. So it's, I would say, also a benign or a green way to make nitriles. You use aqueous ammonia, oxygen, so it's really a relatively stable system, and the only side product in this chemistry is water. And again, if you look at the functional group tolerance, you can do this selectively in the presence of triple bonds, carbon-silicon bonds, carbon-boron bonds. These are agrochemicals, actual agrochemicals on the market, so you have a nice functional group tolerance in this system. I think my last example from the dehydrogenation in this case is work of Xinjiang Kui. Again, a very talented, wonderful student, very gifted student from the group of Xu Feng from the Lanzhou Institute of Chemical Physics. And he developed a process using iron catalysts for the dehydrogenation of heterocycles. Dehydrogenation of alcohols is easy. Now you see we go more and more to more difficult reactions. The dehydrogenation of heterocycles is more difficult. We have shown together with Angelika Brückner that we initially form this organic radical, and this organic radical then leads in the presence of the catalyst to the imine, and then the dehydrogenation takes place easily to make you the heterocycle. And because of the microreversibility of catalysis, so Xinjiang, he used this again for more than 20 examples. He got high yields. These are some actual pharmaceuticals which have been made. And because of the microreversibility of the catalysis, you can do the reverse reaction also. And so while this paper is the dehydrogenation reaction, the second paper here is the hydrogenation reaction from a different perspective. So you can always, depending on your conditions, run in the one or in the other reaction way. So you can not only reduce nitriles, imines, ketones, you can also hydrogenate heterocycles with the system. This is an example that you can, of course, use noble metals. Most of the time, we stay with the non-noble metals because we think they are most interesting. But you can also use noble metals, and they got quite interesting properties. We have seen in the conference a lot of ruthenium chemistry, ruthenium nanoparticles. This is a modified system. We use dicyanamide, or Xinjiang used dicyanamide with this system, And then he observes, again, unusual selectivity. Most of the time, if you do this with ruthenium nanoparticles, you cleave. But here in this system, you get very high selectivity. And for example, benzylic bonds, which are difficult, which are easy to cleave, they are not cleaved here. So it's different selectivity in the system. This is what people in industry like. Cheap, good, fast. So far you might have said, okay, some of these ligands he used, dicyanamide is not so expensive, but some of the ligands, phenanthroline, is expensive. But you can make also by this principle very cheap catalysts. And this is some recent work from Basudev Saho, who worked before with Frank Glorius in Münster and is now working as a postdoc in my group. He used chitosan. It's a waste. It's the hydrolysis product of the crabs. So I'm not sure who like crabs, but at least some, I believe. So you know what is left from the crab. And if you hydrolyze this, you get chitosan. And if you add metals to this, iron or cobalt, nickel, again, ruthenium, you name it, and then you pyrolyze the system, you get active materials. And you can do nitro reduction with the systems. I don't show you this. I will show you only another reaction which shows the big possibilities. That's here. That's a dehalogenation reaction. Again, it's a domain of homogeneous catalysis. But with these catalyst systems, we can attach also a hydrogen or replace nitriles by that. And this can be used, for example, in detoxification of water and so on. So at this point, I will show you now a reaction which I believe has not been described before. And it's a reaction where we only found an iron catalyst. And like Rudyard Kipling's scientist did, iron, cold iron is the master. It's probably not true in chemistry, but I'll give you an example of that. So this reaction I've shown you, nitro to aniline. And we thought, can we combine this with reductive amination? And we tried a lot, but the iron catalyst on carbon is very selective only for the nitro to aniline. So it does not reduce the imine when you add an aldehyde. So it was again Rahana Yale Jagadesh together with Kishore Natte who looked into this. And they found, surprisingly, if you decrease the hydrogen pressure, the reaction worked better. This is counterintuitive. How can we explain this? We do a better hydrogenation reaction if we lower the pressure of hydrogen. And finally, we got the best yield without any hydrogen. It's explained here. These iron catalysts, modified with the carbon-nitrogen phases, they decompose, for example, formaldehyde, giving you hydrogen CO. CO undergoes water gas shift reaction, another hydrogen. And this small amount of hydrogen is enough to do the follow-up chemistry. And with this, then, you can do methylations without any additional hydrogen with an iron catalyst in an aqueous system in a very benign way with all kinds of function in the presence of hydroxy, sulfur, benzylic bonds, ketones, triple bonds, and so on. You can use actual pharmaceuticals directly. And why is this chemistry important? Because a variety of billion-dollar selling drugs, this is a $6 billion drug, $3 billion, $3 billion, and so on. They all have this methyl amino group. You can easily generate this from the corresponding system. And of course, you can use anilines also, or you can use amines. You don't have to use nitro compounds. So what can we learn from each other? I think the basic principles of catalytic processes are the same. The currently viewed subdisciplines, they are complementary. It's not that one is better than the other. We arise from different historical developments, and we make often use of different reaction conditions, and we have different strengths and weaknesses, but the basic principle is the same. And I believe this traditional distinction is obsolete. We should always keep in mind catalysis in industry, in the real world, is a multifunctional phenomenon. Cooperativity with the support, with co-catalysts and so plays a big role, and it's often underestimated. And I should also highlight, I didn't talk today about industrial processes. We have a lot of effort in there, but I didn't talk about that. I already talked too long. So it inspires basic research. We should not forget that, and vice versa. And I think new catalysis will be discovered and established if we cross dimension borders. And I will give you, at the very end, 3 examples from our own work. This is a homogeneous catalyst, again, we developed with Novartis. Look at this. This is a very biological molecule. It's made by fermentation. It's used in 90% of all transplantations in clinics. And we developed a homogeneous catalyst which allows for a selective functionalization. I'm convinced there is heterogeneous catalysts available which can do the same. We only have to find them. To find them that they work on the same principle. Carbon dioxide we have seen in this conference a lot. I'm convinced again, if we combine the principles, we can discover new chemistry. Most of the homogeneous catalysis organic, they make use of expensive metals, the energy-rich materials or so. All of the heterogeneous catalysis takes place under drastic conditions. If we find the right microstructures for the activity, we can combine the advantages. And to do this, we have to allow for reforming processes under mild conditions. And so I believe one of the challenging goals is to do reforming processes under mild conditions. This is work of Lipeng Wu, and he did in a 100% carbon-efficient, atom-efficient way, carbonate with methanol to formate. And this works for heterogeneous catalysis under quite mild conditions. So we used this. It was Zhang Liu, who's now here in Tsinghua University in Peking, who used this principle for doing carbonylations, because he allowed with carbon dioxide, because it allows for reforming processes under mild conditions. And the reforming process you can show by labeled experiments. If you use an olefin, 13 labeled carbon and methanol, then you can do carbonylations, and you will see the majority comes from the carbon dioxide, a little bit comes from the methanol, because the catalyst catalyzes reforming processes. So it's combining the 2 principles. This is actually what I wanted to tell you. I'm thankful very much to the organizer. I'm thankful for you coming so early this morning. I think there is a lot of things to discover. We can think about high temperature chemistry with homogeneous system, which is closer related to heterogeneous. We can think about selectivity with heterogeneous systems, which is traditionally only associated with homogeneous systems. We can think about the combination of systems. So chemistry allows for a lot, and I think catalysis is one of the key principles. With that, I would like to thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers. For the students, this advice: of course, you should think about your experiments, but you should do also a lot. It's like in life, you have to kiss many frogs to find your right catalyst or prince. I'm very thankful to my group. Here you see the former Chinese co-workers. I'm very especially thankful to them being here, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. Thank you.